Welcome to As-Sahwa's podcast, encouraging revival of the mind and the heart, seeking the truth and standing for what is right in the age of overloaded misinformation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to As-Sahwa's podcast, to our first face-to-face interview, and it is with Anas Mustapha, who is with the organization named Cage. So I'll pass it over to Anas himself, who will introduce his role and a little bit about the organization as well. So, Assalamu alaikum, Anas.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for hosting me. Obviously, we know each other going back for quite some time now. It's nice to be speaking to you in this type of format and hopefully share some words that benefit your listeners. And so we'll start straight. So, Anas Mustapha, I'm currently the Head of Public Advocacy at Cage, which in basic terms mean I manage Cage's comms, so media relations, oversee social media output, and help strategize with our reports and research and how we can communicate what we're trying to do to the people that support us, to the people that donate to Cage, and also how we can challenge the people who are harming our community through either laws or policies or rhetoric that ends up kind of undermining our religion, our faith, and our freedoms. You mentioned obviously Cage. We are now Cage International. Right. So last month we kind of announced that rebrand, and it's not a huge shift, but it's an important one. So for 20 years, Cage has been around. Initially, it was called Cage Prisoners, focused on, as the name suggests, the prisoners. And in particular, it was the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. So if you allow me, maybe I'll take your listeners down memory lane.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So in 2001, everyone knows September the 11th, there were attacks against the United States of America. Off the back of that, the United States unleashed what it called the global war on terror. Mm-hmm. But it's also important to understand that the global war on terror itself has a historical context. 9/11 wasn't the first moment, in the same way that we say that, most recently, the 7th of October isn't day one. There were instances of either occupation, war, supporting despotic rulers against Muslim nations, which led to a sort of culmination that led particular groups to launch attacks against the United States of America. Now, the global war on terror, what it did to the world is that it kind of redrew the map of what freedoms are and what the state can do to individuals that it suspects of being quote-unquote terrorists. And that meant, stripping them from their rights, from their citizenship, imprisoning them without charge or trial, torture, and worse. And one of the emblems of that was Guantanamo Bay. In 2002, January of 2002, the first of what would be 800 or nearly 800 prisoners were transported to Guantanamo Bay. America wanted to show the world that it, dominated this poor nation of Afghanistan and has decimated it. And here are its men, hooded with earmuffs, blindfolded, shackled, and in orange jumpsuits. And it actually boasted and published the pictures to the world. Unbeknown to, the United States didn't really expect this response. The world was outraged. People were shocked. They couldn't believe that, the civilized West would do this to human beings. And even if those human beings were alleged to have committed certain crimes that people find unacceptable or heinous, and people would have expected from the United States to put them to trial or put them into prison, as you do normally. Now, Cage prisoners emerged in that context. There was so much fear amongst Muslims, so much anxiety, and people were either paralyzed by that fear and anxiety, or they were of the view that there's no smoke without fire, that these men who find themselves in Guantanamo Bay, perhaps they did something that warranted why they were there. So Cage prisoners emerged to support these men and to tell their stories, piece together information from newly released prisoners, from family members, from friends, to try and stitch together a narrative that says, look, these aren't just hooded guys. These are fathers, these are sons, these are grandparents. They have relatives, they have wives, they have children. And we need to know that story. We need to know why they ended up there. And the first step to humanizing a person, you need to give him give that person a picture, an image that people can relate to. So that was Cage Prisoner's first major piece of work. It was landmark piece of work because no one in the world at that time had collated the names and images of the prisoners of Guantanamo Bay as extensive as Cage Prisoners had done at the time. Now, fast forward a number of years, we recognize that this kind of abuse that we're seeing in Guantanamo is also being exported back home. So we're seeing Muslim homes be raided by counterterrorism police. We're finding people being arrested without charge or trial. We know the case of Babar Ahmed, for example, the longest serving British detainee without charge or trial, nearly 8 years or so, or 9 years without charge or trial at all. And we saw an escalation of sort of violent rhetoric and oppressive laws that strip people from their rights and freedoms, particularly targeting Muslims, but ultimately it will and it has expanded to everyone else. So then the organizer began to focus on other areas of work and rebranded to Cage, to what people now are more familiar with. Now, Cage International comes at a particular junction for the organization, where for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been investing in training, building, empowering other Muslim organizations to do this similar line of work in their own countries, whether that be in Holland or Austria or France, whether that or mounting investigations in Afghanistan in the post-war kind of context, looking at how to expand our work in Bangladesh and India, and it's acknowledging that the threats and the structural kind of problems or issues that Muslims are facing aren't restricted to one domestic context, and we need to, as the kind of detractors and enemies of Muslims and those who wish to usurp the freedoms of people, they work in a very interconnected way. There are a number of lobby groups, number of networks that bring them together where they strategize and plan. And it's only right for Muslim institutions to also mount a pushback that is as organized and as coordinated both domestically and internationally. So Cage Prisoners comes at that point where the organization has, or Cage International, comes at a point where the organization has the experience, has the leverage, and has the connections to be able to build stronger, better, more coordinated, more confident and empowered Muslim, you can say Muslim kind of resistance to oppressive laws and global Islamophobia in a better way globally. So that's what brings us to this particular moment.
So can I ask, when we speak about Cage, is Cage purely a Muslim organization?
So Cage is a Muslim-led organization. Throughout the years, we've had non-Muslims who've worked for us. Currently, we have non-Muslims who work for us, who support our work, who donate to our work. So we've not been exclusively Muslim in that sense. But we are a Muslim organization, meaning that the language we use, our values, our culture is rooted in Islam, is rooted in the Quran, is rooted in the Sunnah. And our understanding of justice, our understanding of freedom are rooted in what the Sharia understands to be justice and freedom. And this is an important distinction because there's a plethora of organizations that work for and campaign for rights and freedoms, from the left and from the right. And each of them claim that they are fighting for justice, they're fighting for equality, and the vast majority of the time they're doing really good work. However, their understanding of justice or their understanding of equality or fairness may extend to issues that we may find the Sharia, would describe as being forbidden, as being haram, or things that we don't align with our values or our culture. And these are important distinctions for us because as we fight for our rights and as we work with others, we need to ensure we also preserve our ability to profess and to practice our faith as honest and as true to it as we can. And that's an important thing that we've always pushed for.
So do you take only cases to do with terrorism, or are you looking at other cases, for example, say if Muslim kids are not allowed to pray in a mosque, in a school, yeah, then do you take on those kind of cases?
So, our area of work has traditionally been counterterrorism because we believe that the the bulk of the oppression that Muslims face, coming from the legal perspective, comes through the counterterrorism powers or counter-extremism powers. But we've seen how these powers have now have kind of seeped into even day-to-day sort of interactions, where now even innocent, discussions in schools become framed within the kind of counter-extremist, counter-terrorist framework or narrative. So that's why, yes, currently we do support kids who may have been stopped from praying in their school or being stopped from holding the Palestine flag, because we recognize it's all connected. But where there's other organizations that have a particular specialism on discrimination, then we may work with them and may pass on those type of cases to them. And that's part of the kind of normal line of work.
So you mentioned Palestine, and I suppose right now it's impossible to have any kind of discussion if you don't mention Palestine at all.
Sure.
In the mosques on Jumu'ah, Friday prayers, the sermon.
Yeah.
I watched a YouTube clip of I believe he was a member of parliament for Labour in the north, and he was crying his eyes out, saying that I'm resigning. I just watched it last night. I'm sorry I didn't get the name. However, the point is that everybody has been affected by the issue of Palestine, and it's not for us as Muslims. Obviously, it's going to hurt us a lot because of the fact that we have that connection of faith and iman with our brothers and sisters there, but at the same time, we are seeing this injustice. Now, you mentioned quite a few things actually, which come to mind. You're talking about 2003, 2002, when the war on so-called terror, the axis of evil in Afghanistan, I mentioned Pakistan as well, Iran and what have you, and the amount of Muslims I saw that were arrested and houses were raided was phenomenal. It'd be in the newspapers every other week. But now talking about Palestine, things have changed in these 20 odd years, where Muslims and non-Muslims alike have been subject to terrorism legislation and arrest. So my question now is, in terms of the Palestinian issue, do you think that there's been a rise in especially children being subject to these kind of prevent strategy and terror legislation maybe for the older kids?
Yeah, you raise an important point. And I have to kind of tread carefully because I don't want to end up scaremongering. In 2015, there was a particular piece of legislation that was passed called the CTS Act, Counterterrorism and Security Act. What this piece of law did, it made prevent on a statutory footing. What that means in simple terms, it placed a legal responsibility on teachers, public sector workers, teachers, doctors, nurses, to be aware of extremism and to report it to prevent. Yeah. And what that led to is an enormous number of teachers acting on prejudices and sometimes fears that are misplaced about Islam and about Muslims, and energized by headlines that you would read in the Sun, like 1 in 5 Muslims support ISIS, or those kind of ridiculous headlines that you'd read, and also by the climate of fear and anxiety around Muslims that's manufactured and pushed by some sections of the media. So many kids are being referred. A kid was referred for having a shirt saying, "I love Abu Bakr," or "I want to be like Abu Bakr," and the teacher thought that was...
Sorry, just for our audience, because the audience is obviously a lot of non-Muslims as well. So when we're talking about Abu Bakr, he was one of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, just to make that clear. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and the teacher thought that was Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of ISIS, right? And
sorry, I just remembered something. I don't know if you guys ever saw the image of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, a historian, and somebody put a poster of the kind of present day Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Bangladesh. Did you see that image?
No.
Right. So obviously they Googled it and the wrong Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi came up and they plastered it. I think it was around Bangladesh. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean these kind of sad scenarios happen so often. It's just like an indictment of the kind of upside down world we live in. So kids have been referred due to kind of their support for Palestine, and also due to them espousing certain Islamic principles or values, and they've been conflated with extremism and terrorism. In the vast majority of cases, these lead to nowhere. But what it causes is it kind of institutionalizes the kids. You know, those names that are taken and recorded and put down in the police systems and records, they remain there. You know, and there's evidence that was leaked a couple of months ago in one of the British newspapers that actually those names actually are handed over to border police.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so now when you're traveling...
For what purpose exactly?
For intelligence sharing. Right, so now a person referred to prevent, they might be flying back into the UK or out, and then the border police will end up flagging their name and them being stopped.
Right,
you know, that's a possibility.
Okay,
and that's obviously, I'm sure you're very aware yourself of the powers that the police have at the borders. So
unfortunately, yes.
Yes. So you know they can stop you and question you for up to 6 hours. It used to be 9. And you have to answer their questions. If you say no comment, you will actually be arrested and convicted as a terrorist. If you refuse to give your passwords, as my colleague Mohammed Rabbani, who's the managing director of Cage, Cage International, he refused to hand over his passwords because he was protecting the evidence of a torture survivor.
Right.
And he was convicted. So there isn't. So that's an extraordinary power. I mean, that's the whole discussion on its own. But just to show to you how all these laws over the last 20 years, they all kind of fit together to create this like absurd scenario where everywhere you go, there's a risk of you becoming criminalized for activity that is fairly normal. There's nothing suspicious about it. You're not intending to harm anyone whatsoever. And with the context of Palestine, because it's so politicized, because the government is so gung-ho in supporting the Israeli Zionist entity and supporting its narrative and supporting its so-called right to resist or defend itself, right? We're seeing widespread arrests, targeting, punishment of kids at schools, referrals to prevent, and more. And this is something we've been working on for the last 3 months. And we've produced a report on it, and I think from the figures that we have, it's somewhere near like 100 children that we have alone that we've kind of supported, and I'm pretty sure there are hundreds more out there who perhaps have gone to other organizations or their parents managed to deal with the situation themselves. So it is a slightly worrying picture, but what's very heartwarming about all of this is that there's been a sense of unity of purpose, a sense of wide-scale empowerment. I've been up and down different masajid, different cities, speaking to people, delivering Know Your Rights workshops.
Okay.
And you sense it, and people are fed up, and they're willing to take risks to defend Palestine, to speak the word of truth, despite and in the face of all of that repression. And I think that's a testament to the strength of the community, and also that the Palestinian issue, despite attempts of these kind of waves of normalization, waves of attempting to kind of quash it and finish it off, and and all sorts by governments across the world, and sorts of attempts to normalize the Zionist narrative through interfaith work and frame any sort of resistance to it within the counter-extremism and counter-terrorism stuff. People are still pushing back, and people aren't buying it, and that's reassuring and refreshing. Alhamdulillah.
So this obviously is not affecting just Muslims now. It's affecting a lot of non-Muslims, especially kids in school. In the east of London, we've seen a lot of non-Muslims come out in demonstrations. And I'm sure that they would be able, to get affected. So I don't think there should be any issue for them as non-Muslims to contact yourselves at Cage?
No, not at all. I mean, and we have. We've supported a number of non-Muslim clients over the years. And even in the context of Palestine, we've supported people who aren't Muslim. I mean, for us, it's not the people who, because we work in the space of, discrimination, counterterrorism powers. The reality is the vast majority of those who are impacted are Muslim. So the system, by design, pretty much singles out Muslims. Yeah. But if someone was to be not a Muslim, not from our community, who's impacted by this and reaches out to us, then we would welcome them and support them, and we have done so, and we continue to do so.
Great. Just to ask you, you mentioned before in terms of Cage International now operating in many European countries, and you mentioned Bangladesh and Pakistan as well, or not?
Pakistan, not for now, but we have partners in Pakistan.
Right. So now, how do your colleagues in these particular countries now, how have they had any impact from the local authorities, the police, or the intelligence service?
So in each location, it's a different style of work. Now, for example, in Austria, we have a fully fledged branch in Austria, which we launched towards the tail end of last year. We have a team there, they have a network, they have a community. It's far more established, and it's more akin to kind of how we would operate in the UK, but a slightly smaller operation. In comparison, France, for example, where it's extremely hostile, where we've seen over the last years the shutdown of numerous Muslim organizations, hundreds of masajid, Muslim businesses, the confiscation of tens of millions of euros from the Muslim community, and it was headlined by the shutdown of France's largest Muslim charity and France's biggest anti or Islamophobia kind of discrimination group. It was called the CCIF. Right. They were both shut down by the government. So in France, the way we operate is very different. So we have staff members who are there, and they work mostly on research, documenting and supporting others who are mobilizing on the ground. And because we Cage International is based in the UK, the French government aren't able to, for example, like shut us down in that sort of way. And as a result, they've attempted other means to silence our voice through some of the kind of traditional means, tabloid press in France, which have published numerous nonsense stories, and they've twice banned our managing director Mohamed Rabbani from entering France. So once, and it was overturned, and then just last year it was imposed once again, another ban on his entry to France.
Right.
But this doesn't faze us, and we're going to continue our work. And our work in France at the moment is quite pioneering, and those are the kind of two different types of models, just for your listeners to be aware.
Sure.
So we have to adapt to particular contexts, and sometimes it's working through other partner organizations which we've trained or assisted, and through them we can deliver work in a coalition or something similar to that.
Sure. You mentioned about Mohamed Rabbani basically being banned from entering France, but was it somewhere else? Recently he was also banned on the request of the French government. Yeah, so
it's essentially still France that is behind it all. So he in 2022, I believe, he delivered a speech at the OSCE. The OSCE is the world's largest intergovernmental organization that brings together civil society, so like NGOs, and government representatives, represented by most nations of the world. I think something like 57 or 56 countries, including most of the Western world. So he delivered a very powerful speech there about France's repression of Muslims. Off the back of that, within a month, France issued a ban against him.
Just for France?
Yeah. So fast forward 1 year, he attempts to fly to Poland.
Right.
For that same conference again. We had, but this time we've brought together a first of its kind coalition of Muslim organizations across Europe
Right.
to highlight how that discrimination that Muslims face through counter-terrorism, counter-extremism, and other type of Islamophobic laws are across the board, and it's kind of like, you know, and that's never been done before.
Right.
And he was unfortunately turned away at the Polish borders, and they said to him, "Look, we have nothing against you, but there seems to be something on the system that says you can't enter like a request." Eventually, it turned out it was the French request, and again, just last month, he attempted to go to Geneva,
Right.
Switzerland, for a meeting of NGOs,
Right.
organized by an initiative called the Baku Initiative, focused on neo-colonialism and the kind of consequences of Western colonial powers meddling, you can say, in the poorer or the global south. And he was denied entry.
To Geneva?
Yeah, he was denied entry. He was actually held at UN base, so he should have been allowed entry. So it made absolutely no sense. And again, it was due to the French ban. So that's something we're definitely challenging through the courts. So we believe we have strong grounds to overturn that.
Right.
As it makes no sense. I mean, he doesn't pose any sort of security risk or anything of that sort. It's ridiculous, and it's just an assault on a Muslim activist who is helping and supporting other Muslims who are facing problems and challenges.
I mean, oops, sorry about that. It does highlight the situation that where a government, a powerful government as well, because France is not one of those countries which is like kind of a pushover, state. It is a powerful government, and we know their influence they have, especially in Africa, and other parts of the Arab world as well. But such a country such as France to take such measures to make sure that someone like Mohammed Rabbani, who is not actually a threat, to stop them from going into other countries, which is, again, bizarre, it proves to me, in a sense, there's something right you guys are doing at Cage, right? And they see your work being, I suppose, offensive to them and a threat to them as well, right? But what we can see is that you're doing everything within the realms of the law, here in the UK and internationally as well. But one thing which got me was you mentioned the issue of Poland. I find it really strange to have such a meeting of all countries in Europe in Poland, because Poland is known to be quite a racist country. What's your thoughts on that?
I don't know about the enough about the history of the OSCE. I know they hold conferences in different nations. This particular, the human rights dimension, for the last number of years, it's been held in Warsaw, in Poland. I don't know, but I hear your comment. Sometimes it does sound odd. I mean, the Polish politicians have come out numerous times over the years, making it quite clear that the reason they're safe is because they have no immigration, and the reason why there's no terrorism because there's no Muslims.
Literally,
I think
that's right. I saw that one.
Politician said it pretty much in those kind of words.
I watched it on TV, or on YouTube when he made that comment, and he said the reason why we don't have rapes in our country is because we don't have immigrants. As if to say there's no other rapes being committed in Poland, and there's no terrorism because there's no Muslim people here. That was his words. But no, I mean, just generally speaking, when we look at Europe, we find the issue of racism still a major problem. It's really a cancer more than anything else. Especially now with Palestine being at the focal point, and many of us being involved, on research and podcasting and videos, you see a strange connection, a link. And I don't want anyone to take my words out of context, but the connection of European colonialism with European racism, with the mentality that the European white population are more articulate than the rest of the world or Africa, because this was one of the colonial missions that they wanted to civilize Africa, So you have all of this that's going on, but then when you look at some of the words, the phrases that are coming from the Israeli, parliament and the politicians, I find such connections and links between what they are saying and what the racists have been saying for the past 100 years in Europe. And if you look at a lot of the Israeli members of parliament, even if you look at their names, they're very European names. Really and truly, they're one or two generations, but from Europe. What do you think of this?
The Western colonialism is definitely rooted in racism and rooted in white supremacy. I mean, the degree of violence that they exacted on the rest of the world that they colonized is unbelievable. It's grotesque. You hear about internment camps, about mass killings. I mean, Namibia, for example, recently issued a statement against Germany for after they intervened for Israel. You'd think that Germany would learn one or two things about its history when it comes to exacting genocides, right?
Precisely.
But instead, they came on the side of Israel, and Namibia responded to them and reminded them that they pretty much wiped out a large section, a large percentage of the Namibian society, particularly the men.
So,
In order to kind of take control of that nation and have and give birth to new kind of German Namibian hybrid children or something like that. And we've seen Western colonialism do extensive damage in the Muslim world, particularly Algeria, 120 years of French colonialism.
Yep.
Millions lost their lives.
And the scars are still fresh.
Exactly. Millions lost their lives there. And elsewhere in the Muslim world. So India as well, the British took over India, one of the richest nations in the world, left it one of the poorest, nations of the world. The Bengal famine that Winston Churchill was happy to see happen during his time. So there's so much blood and misery off the back of Western colonialism, and that's fundamentally because they didn't see these people as being human or being worthy of any sort of human rights or any protections. They were there to be exploited and to be used, and that's it. Obviously, as the example would be the transatlantic slavery. Now, when it comes to Israel in many ways echoes a lot of that. Yeah, the Zionist ideology echoes a lot of that supremacy. It's a supremacist ideology. It echoes a lot of that racism. The way they see and view Palestinians is they view them as non-entities, people who are not worthy of life. That's the only way you could kill 30, 40,000 people and not bat an eyelid. You are making proposals to ethnically cleanse Gaza Strip and throw these people to whatever. I mean, there was a proposal, I think, in the past couple of days where they said we should create a man-made island and send all the Gazans to that to live in that island. And it's scary sometimes. You're listening to these kind of declarations, and you just think these people are absolutely unhinged.
Well, don't forget human animals, remember?
Of course, you had that as well, and you had the Israeli president himself who said everyone in Gaza is responsible. So these people they don't view the Palestinians as humans or as equals. And they would rather rid themselves of the Palestinians. See them all wiped out. I think that would be a great day for them. But the Palestinians are a resilient people. They've continued to resist. They've continued to survive and thrive in some instances as well. And they have been a thorn in their side and have not allowed the occupation of Palestine to continue unquestioned. And they're definitely doing a service for the rest of the Muslims in the world by being there at the vanguard, protecting Masjid al-Aqsa and protecting the sanctity of Palestine.
Funny enough, there's a couple of points you made. So recently, us guys at As-Sahwa, we've been making some small shorts, YouTube shorts, about colonialism, European colonialism. And the first one we did was actually about Namibia and Germany. And we had a response, like a decent response. Then recently we did one about the Dutch. And that's just gone crazy. And when you read some of the comments, one of the comments were, well, the short itself is really speaking about the issue of slavery, how many people were killed, the actions they committed, right? The atrocities they committed against the African people. And the comments were, the Dutch were great people. They've done a great work. They spread good things around the world. And I was just like, wow, we've just explained to you what the Dutch have done for, whatever period it was, and yet you're praising the work. So the mentality is really scary. And just for the listeners to know, there's a large Palestinian community in Haiti, in the island of Haiti, in Argentina, and in Chile. I only found out recently that in Chile, they've got a football team, which are Palestinians ethnically, and they've named it something to do with Palestine, right? So I was like intrigued to how the Palestinians reach to these places. But I must say, Argentina has a large Jewish community as well, right? So it's not the only Palestinians that were driven out. Yeah, Jews were driven out from other areas as well. And another fact is that there's actually a city in America called Palestine. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. I came across that with something else. I was looking for something else, and when I saw the name, I thought, "What is that? That's so absurd, right?" So the point I'm trying to make is that, especially for Palestine, where they've been driven out of their homeland to other parts of the world, so many of them have been killed as well at the same time. Now, apart from being resilient, there's something I see as a historical aspect as well. So the area of Gaza was known to be originally populated by people called the Philistines, who were from the Aegean Sea around Greece and what have you. Okay, they weren't Muslim, and they were there during the time of the Judean kingdoms, and they were always in a thorn of on the side. And strange enough, where you see Gaza today, that is exactly the area where Philistine was, right? And for many hundreds of years, they just stayed there, and they continued to fight against the Judean kingdoms, including cities like Ashdod and some other countries over the coast. So strange enough, someone made a comment I was reading, and they said, well, when Hamas attacked Israel, it wasn't attacking Israel. It was in Ashdod and these cities, which was originally a part of Gaza in the first place, right? That's just a side point that I just really wanted to make. Make it aware to the listeners that what we're seeing today in Palestine is because of the repercussions of Western colonialism. When the British in 1917, 1919 did the British Mandate and the Jews went there, originally, when the king gave them permission, it was to build a Jewish homeland, not necessarily to be ruled by the Jews. And this is where the chaos came into. So I see part responsibility on this upon the United Nations, who allowed it in the first place, or at that time I think it was the League of Nations. Okay, but also majority of the responsibility lies upon the British government. Okay. Just to kind of wrap up, just want to get your views on a couple of other things here. Yemen, the Houthis. Today, there was fresh attacks on the Houthis by America and the UK. Now, I'm quite surprised the action they've taken, because the fact that 25,000 plus people have died in Palestine. Yet they didn't think for a moment, let us send a peacekeeping troop, right? And say to Israel, listen, we're going to send our boys over armed, and we're going to make sure nothing comes through, okay? But let's just have some stability for the land of Gaza at the moment, because it's in chaos. And it's affecting the rest of the world. But yet they've turned their attention towards Yemen and continued their bombing. So do you think, obviously I feel as if it's going to escalate, but where do you think it's going to go from here?
The Houthi movement, they don't have the capacity to be in a full confrontation with the United States of America and with the Western world.
Sorry, do you think America or the West would occupy Yemen.
No, I don't think that's. I think the era of foreign forces on boots on the ground to occupy a nation. I think, for now at least, it's something that the West perhaps won't consider, especially especially in the Middle East. I think Afghanistan has been a very difficult lesson. Iraq continues to be a kind of failed state and an example of what should never be done. And that's cost them trillions and trillions of dollars. So I think the era of boots on the ground, occupation, that kind of thing, perhaps we've seen the tail end of it. I'm not going to say absolutely, so don't hold me to my word.
Yeah, of course.
But what they have announced that they will do is these sort of over the horizon operations, which means that they will be ready to conduct targeted operations whenever they feel necessary, and they ensuring that they have the capacity and the readiness to do so at any moment, anywhere in the globe. And that's how they want to sustain or maintain their dominance, especially because in Yemen, it's a major international trade route through the sea there, the Red Sea. And that's what the Houthis are playing on. They recognize that that's a soft spot, and that's an area where they can exert a lot of pressure globally. And if they disrupted trade routes through there, then they may be able to influence or cause other nations to reconsider their position when it comes to the genocide that we're seeing in Gaza. Because ultimately, it seems that human deaths don't mean anything, but perhaps a delayed Amazon package, wow, that's really terrible.
Of course,
like imagine not getting your 20th pair of 20th outfit from Alibaba, and it comes, instead of 3 weeks, it takes 6 weeks or 12. You can imagine the despair that will cause on the streets of London and across the Western world.
Absolutely.
So that seems to be the only language that the West understands. It's the language of trade and language of money, and it's really unfortunate. It means that there's a complete collapse of morals and ethics. Human lives are meaningless, but money means everything. And we saw, I think just yesterday, there was a really great segment on Sky News. There was a Dr. Myriam Francois. She was on Sky News with, I don't know the opposing guest, but he was someone who was defending the position of the United States and its allies in bombing Yemen.
Right.
And she made a great contribution on that point. I recommend you listeners to go listen to it. It's a very short clip.
Sure.
And essentially, it's like it's what I just said. That there's a genocide happening. And the nations haven't moved because of that. And they're saying Israel has the right to defend itself, and we're saying, okay, it has the right to defend itself when 5,000 dead, 10,000 dead, 15,000, 20,000. When does that end?
Precisely.
And also, we're seeing like where is this most moral or ethical army in the world? It's bombed, it's destroyed 75 or 80% of Gaza. People can't even return back to their homes. There's no homes to return to. Of 36 hospitals in Gaza, none of them are operational. Kids, I literally saw a horrifying video yesterday. A father holding his daughter's eyes, covering her eyes, as a doctor stitches a deep wound on her shoulder, a gaping wound, without anesthetic.
Wow.
And she's crying, and the father, he doesn't know, you could just see in his eyes just the horror, fear. And, you see all these elderly ladies living in burnt homes and just trying to find any means to survive. The people are actually, grinding cattle feed in order to produce something that resembles flour to make food to eat. And then that doesn't move the world. But if people go out on the streets of London or Paris and disrupt people from attending the theatre or visiting the West End to, sightsee and see Big Ben, well, that's a major inconvenience. We can't allow that to continue. Well, let's do some action. Let's show some moral courage and some ethics and some values and stop the thing that's happening. So the Houthis clearly, They have tried to mobilize. I mean, you can. There's lots of analysis out there about their motives or their ideology and whatever. But let's not get too deep into that. Yeah.
No, no,
Let's
no,
just think
no.
of it. Let's just see it for what it is.
Sure.
It's an attempt to disrupt trade routes
Yep.
in order to keep the issue of Palestine on the agenda.
Yeah.
Whatever their agenda may be, that's for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, or whatever motivates them, that's for them. I'm not here to discuss that. But
do you think? Well, look at the fresh attacks today.
yeah,
So these attacks are going to continue, right? So what I'm not really kind of understanding is the fact that what is America bombing? Because when you look at some of the photographs, they show this was before and this was after. It looked exactly the same to me. So I don't know. Is it a case? I mean, Biden said yesterday, we know we're not making our impact, but we're still going to bomb them anyway. So is it a case of they are moving the attention from Palestine, and at the same time making the issue of the Red Sea a big thing, right? As if they're going to save the rest of the world from an economic downfall or something, right? And at the same time, keeping that attention away from Palestine. So my question now is really, how long are they going to continue to bomb places like the Houthis?
I mean, it is slightly complex for them. The Americans have been bombing Yemen for a good number of years, at least, going back over a decade. They've been bombing Yemen through the joint strikes and other operations and, Marine Corps operations and all sorts of stuff. I mean, most famously, they killed the son of Anwar al-Awlaqi because he was out with his cousins.
Yep.
They killed his daughter. She was in her tribe, living her life, her best years as a child. Trump sent a special operation and she was shot in the neck and bled out. So America has been bombing and killing Yemenis for a long time. And right now, Yemen is still pretty much in the midst of a sort of civil war. And I think the Americans are very conscious of that. They're very conscious that perhaps they don't want to conduct military activity that destabilizes Yemen further and perhaps undermines the national interests of its allies, the Saudi Arabia in particular, and the UAE in the region. So I don't know. There's multiple calculations, but definitely the airstrikes do serve to distract world attention from what's happening in Gaza to as you mentioned, some strikes that even Biden himself says they're sort of meaningless.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, look, for me, America polices those waters heavily. If your listeners were aware, some period of time, I think maybe about 5-10 years ago, Somali quote unquote pirates, we're causing some serious havoc. Some serious havoc, and that was obviously that's driven by the poverty and corruption and the lack of opportunity in Somalia. And the Americans, they got fed up, so they actually conducted serious military operations across along the Somali coastline, killing these Somali young men, arresting them, and taking them to the United States and putting them to trial and all sorts of stuff. And they managed to shut it down very quickly. So does America have the ability to protect those trading routes? It certainly does. Does it have the firepower to subdue the Houthis? It definitely does. Is it doing it right now? They themselves admitted not really. But I think sustaining that particular charade that something's being done perhaps is helpful for Israeli propaganda.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have to wrap up soon. Just to kind of end it here, what one advice would you give to the communities, and I mean Muslim and non-Muslim communities out there, which are facing any kind of situation where they will need some sort of legal help?
Firstly, for us, is for people to be courageous. Yeah, people to take a stand for what you believe in, stand for your ethics, stand for your values, stand for your deen, ultimately, as number one thing. And that's something we lose sight of. When you're targeted, when you feel fearful, especially put in uncomfortable situations, people may think that they need to compromise, they need to delete people from their contact list or isolate themselves entirely.
Absolutely.
And all of these are unnecessary, and driven by fear. We all feel fearful. Everyone it's a natural feeling, but you can't allow that to dominate you, and you have to act with courage, and that's what's required of us. So I think that's one thing. And also another piece of advice is to not abandon the struggle for justice. Something my colleague was saying at an event we had over the weekend was that 20 years on, are we a community collectively working to fight injustice and establish justice, or are we content with giving our sadaqah to Cage or any other organization and say, you know what, you do our fard kifaya and we'll continue our life? Realistically speaking, the second point I'd say is, as a community, we need to collectively fight for justice. And that means we cannot be in a position where we think that by donating to Cage or another similar organization that we've essentially absolved ourselves, from the responsibility. These are individual obligations upon each and every one of us. Mm-hmm. So, 20 years on from the organization being born, are we as a community any better, or working collectively on an individual level and collectively in fighting for justice, in defending those who are oppressed, in standing in solidarity with each other, in not acting out of fear and cowardice, or are we yet to get there? This is an important question we need to reflect on. And it's not just the duty on Cage to do all of the above, and then everyone else can just sit at home. We all need to be doing that work. That's why for me, I see this work very much rooted in our deen. I see in the tradition in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, in tradition of the Sahaba and the scholars, that speaking the word of truth is as important as other obligations in our deen, and it shouldn't be neglected, and it should be upheld, and people should value it and give it the importance that it deserves, especially in times of global deceit, global corruption, and global injustice.
Brilliant, fantastic. Jazakallah khair for your time. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here with you guys at Cage, and we'll most definitely be back again to do another podcast on various topics, because today was just literally speaking a introduction to Cage, and there's a lot more to speak as well, to speak about. So Jazakallah khair, thank you for your time.
Barakallah fiqh.
And inshallah we will return to more of our episodes, so hope to see you soon. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.